now. All right. Okay. We're recording now. Bitzer uh, wrote, this is a professor of speech, public speaking professor. And he also says that the enthymeme is an incomplete syllogism, that is, syllogism having one or more suppressed premises. So I highlighted or more. It wasn't highlighted in his article. So I highlighted that. So what we see is if all you have is a conclusion, it's still an enthymeme. You just don't have all the information you need to finish the argument. So, and the reason they do this is because the audience participates in the discussion and in the forming of the conclusion, because the audience then has to finish the argument. And when they do, it becomes part of their thinking process. And this is one of the things that Aristotle even claimed, okay? So the point to emphasize, only the speaker and the audience jointly produce them, see, because they're jointly produced, the audience then begins to be convinced better by the argument, rather than just a full-blown syllogism, major premise, minor premise, conclusion. If you have an enthymeme, the audience then has to participate in it to finish the argument. Of course, you're assuming that people will reason well enough to see it, okay? That's part of the problem. Can you scroll it down just a little bit? And then the speaker, then, he needs to be skillful in doing this. This is rhetoric. It's called rhetoric, and it's be able to persuade people. So they're more persuasive than syllogisms. Keep that in mind. Go ahead to the next page if you would. We're having, for anybody viewing this, we're having trouble with Skype, and I'm trying to get it worked out. Our enthymeme is only probably true. Mudd, he's a professor of rhetoric, and many other professors of rhetoric who teach public speaking, they claim that they're only probably true, because the reason they make this claim is because most of your professors of rhetoric and most of your professors of speech do not use logic. They use inductive reasoning, not deductive reasoning. And so that's the problem here. Most of them have bought into John Dewey's philosophy that the only way we know things is by science. And so if you go and get a degree in speech, you're going to be taught that. And you're not going to be taught logic. You'll be taught rhetoric and how to convince people. And to them, an enthymeme is only probably true. So I know a preacher or two that was in charge of a preacher training school, and he was teaching the students, and basically that deductive reasoning is not sound. And so I think this is more widespread than you might think, because they go off and get a degree in public speaking. And that's how they think, right? Now, of course, they argue that it's inductive, and inductive reasoning is only probably true. We'll get to inductive reasoning later. Unless you have all the information. And if you have all the information on a particular subject that there is to know, then you can when your inductive reasoning can become deductive. But the progressive education system that is set in motion by John Dewey and those who followed him teaches the only way you know anything is by science, and that's inductive reasoning. And you can't be certain about science. So I've encountered preachers who have had this line of thinking. derived from their study of speech in college. Can you advance it again there, please? Now, let's look into chapter 5. We'll come back to enthymemes later, because basically what we're getting into, we got a conclusion, and with an enthymeme, we got a conclusion. If we just have a conclusion, and if a person affirms something, he makes a claim, we have his conclusion. And with his conclusion of his argument, we have his major term and minor terms. The minor term is your subject of the, it's a subject, and the major term is the predicate of the conclusion. And we have to find and determine the middle term. We'll get some more information later in a later chapter about how we can determine a major, a middle term, and we can figure out what it is. Some rules for determining what it is. So we'll expand on this a little bit later. Let's look at conjunctive and disjunctive propositions. These are the words usually and or. A conjunction is a word that joins words or groups of words. Of course, our most common conjunctions are in laws, and this is an English grammar book, are and, but, or, nor, or for. And we're going to be looking at or and primarily, those two conjunctions. The or and are used in a special way in logic. The word or is called a disjunction, and the word and is called a conjunction. And so while these other words may be called conjunctions, we won't be using them. We'll be using and or. Now, the first type of compound statement to be considered is a conjunction, and we're going to use the word and. And so when we have them called conjuncts, it's true if and only if both the conjuncts are true. Now, let me illustrate this. You may have two switches on a light, and they're both in line with one another. And I don't know why you do that, but you could. And if you did, you'd have to have both of them turned on if they were both in series with the light bulb. And if you don't have them both turned on, switch A and switch B on, it won't turn on. And this is something that happens in electronic circuits in computers. They have what's called AND gates. And what they do is all of them have to be satisfied in order for the output to be high. And it's like turning a light on. And so A and B, if A and B, let me illustrate this. Let's go to Mark 16, 15, and 16. That's a good illustration. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. Now, these arguments always put the subject first and the predicate last, like we do in English normally. So they don't always function that way, particularly in the Greek. So what we have here is in Mark 16, 15, and 16, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. Shall be saved is your claim. You're claiming if one is saved, then he has believed and been baptized. So all those who believe or are saved are those who both believe and are baptized. So that's how we would write this. And again, I can't type this on the screen like I've been used to. So if we take Mark 16, 15, and 16, it's telling us that if someone is saved, it guarantees that he has done two things, A and B. A, he has believed, and B, he has been baptized. But it's not saying there's not something else he's done. It's just saying it guarantees he's done those two things. Perhaps more could be done, but that verse guarantees those two things if you have a saved person. Am I making sense? Any questions? So if we take this, kind of back it up just a minute, if you would, just thank you. All right. The words of Jesus entail an A-type proposition. All those who are saved are those who have both believed and been baptized. Any questions? All right, go ahead if you would and progress it just a little bit. Thank you. All right. Now, this gets into some symbolic language. And we're going to use some symbols. I don't know if my mouse, you can see it. Can you see my mouse moving around? Let me know if you can. I can see it on my screen. All right. S, and then there's an arrow on the second line. Parentheses, BE, and then there's a little mountain of an arrow pointing up. And right there. Thank you. So that's what we're looking at. That's a symbol, a symbolic language to mean and. And so B is believe and BA is baptized. So if you're saved, S, and the arrow means then. So if one is saved, then he has believed and been baptized. And it guarantees that. So if we have a saved person, we guarantee he's done that. Other verses will guarantee other things he's done. But this guarantees that he has believed and been baptized. Some logicians write it, go down to the third line, if you would, S, and they use just the ampersand, which incidentally, I believe that was a letter in the English alphabet before about 1770. And they took it out of the alphabet, but they kept it to use as an abbreviation for and. So if you're saved, then it guarantees that you believe and have been baptized. Now, there's a third one down in that same line, S, and if you're saved, then you believe in that little hump, kind of a round horseshoe thing there. Sometimes that's called the horseshoe, and that's just also a symbol for and. So you'll see all three symbols in different books. That's why I'm introducing this. The symbol on the fourth line, this arrow, looks like an arrow. It means then. And so, see, if you're saved then, and also that's that horseshoe laying on its side that you just highlighted, that also means then. So it could be, if you're saved, then it guarantees that you believe and have been baptized. The arrow could do it, or the little horseshoe lying on its side could do that. Now, any questions? All right. Now we have what's called a truth table, and we'll have to come back to this, but a truth table is to list all the conditions. Since we only have two options, it's true or false, we can make this truth table. We got 4 sets of conditions. We believe and baptized and saved. There's 3 things there. If we say it's false that you believe, it's false that you have been baptized, it's therefore false that you're saved, because you have to do both, believe and be baptized to be saved. If it's true, false that you believe, but it's true that you've been baptized, and there are people who don't believe but are still baptized for whatever reason, it's false that you're saved. And go back down to the third set of conditions. If it's true that you have been believed, but it's false that you have been baptized, then it's false that you're saved, because it's an and statement. Both have to be true. Now we get to the fourth set of conditions. It's true that you believe, it's true that you have been baptized, then it's true that you are saved. So that's what this is guaranteeing. This passage, Mark 16, 15, and 16, is guaranteeing here. Now, let me point out here, just from the standpoint of what's said in the passage, that's all we know. Now, it doesn't mean that that's the only thing you have to do, but it says, we know we have to do those things, okay? But, so it's giving us some prerequisites for salvation, belief, and baptism. other verses we can show will show us other things have to be done. Now, any questions? That's an and statement, a conjunction, a conjunct. Both have to be true to get the, in other words, on that fourth set of conditions, they both have to be true to get the saved condition to be true. If you're saved, then it guarantees that you have believed and been baptized. So and means both have to be true for you to get the result to be true. Okay? That's your truth table, it's called. Okay? Now let's go down to the next one, scroll down just a bit. The second type of statement is a disjunction. That's the word or. Now, the disjunction is two statements, A or B. All right, is formed in English by inserting our word or. All right, we could make it this way: either you have authority, either John's baptism was of God, or of heaven, or of men. Say it's or; it's one of the two. In that case, it can't be both. It's one or the other, but not both of them. So the word or is used, it's ambiguous. It can be used in two ways. And so that kind of throws a little kink into works here. Because you could say, when Jesus said the baptism of John, whence was it, of heaven or of men? He wasn't saying it could be both. He's saying it's one or the other, but not both. That's an exclusive or, and you could have a situation where you'd have both. If someone says, do you want on your ice cream cone, on your ice cream, do you want some hot fudge and some marshmallow, both? And I'd say, marshmallow or hot fudge. Well, I say, why not both? Say I could have both. So or could be both. And so we'll see that here in just a minute. So or is ambiguous. That is, it can have a different meaning, having two related but distinguishable meanings. One of them, and of course we're quoting it, this is a quote here. One of them is exemplified in the statement, premiums will be waived in the event of sickness or unemployment. But the intention here that obviously the premiums are waived not only for a sick person, but for an unemployed person, for both sick, but also for persons who are both sick and unemployed. And so you could have either or could be both of them here in that sense. Since the word or is called a weak or inclusive or, it includes both. An inclusive disjunction is true in case one or the other or both disjuncts are true. Only if both disjuncts are false is the conclusive disjunctive false. So the inclusive or has a sense of either, possibly both. Isn't that clear? So we have to be careful when we use the word or. Can you scroll it down just a minute? Where? Where precision is at a premium, and as in contracts and other legal documents, the sense is made explicit by the use of the and or. In this case, rather than just using the word or in like a legal document, they may say and or. And when it could be both of them, one or the other or both. And so that's how I word it and if it's an inclusive or like this, I go ahead and kind of write it in my writings as and or and slash or. The word or is also used of a strong exclusive sense. And here he says, whether the restaurant lists salad or dessert on a table of menu, and it clearly means that the stated price of the meal, the diner may have one or the other, but not both. When a precision is at a premium, and exclusive or is intended, the phrase but not both is usually added. And so when Jesus said to the Pharisees, I think it was, at the baptism of John. I think it was maybe it was the elders and the scribes. But he said to the men that were asking him, he said, the baptism of John, whence was it? Of heaven or of men? And so that was exclusive. It could be of heaven or of men, but not both. And that's how we must interpret that. That's the only way we can interpret that, right? It is, one is true, but not the other one. They can't both be true, right? So the inclusive statement is placed in a simpler form, symbolic form. The symbolic form is simpler, and once the symbols are understood, it's easier to evaluate. Now, the symbolic form down at the bottom of the page, what we have here about the fourth line, 1, 2, 3, fourth line, at the end of the fourth line from the bottom of the page, the symbol that's used there looks like a V. And that little symbol there means or, but that's inclusive. It could be both, right? And so our symbol where it could be both of them, right, where it could be both of them, includes, if you go to the right of that on the next line, and that little tilde there means not. The tilde, that's not. And so not H and M. H or M and not H and M. So not both of them. And so that symbol goes to about near the end of that third line from the bottom. There's a symbol there that's a circle with a little plus in the middle of it. That's a symbol meaning exclusive or. It is H or M, but not both. On the next line, that's how that's read. So we have an exclusive or and an inclusive or, right? Now, if you're into computers, circuits have circuits for both of these. So they have circuits that they'll do both, okay? Appendix D is a list of symbols used in logic. Now, why symbols? Well, it kind of helps us to we can write something very short and very concise. We don't have to write out a bunch of words. So if you get the symbols down, that's what happens there with those. Okay? A truth table from an exclusive distribution, disjunction. Let's go to the next page. We'll see a truth table for an exclusive or. Can you move it? Yeah, thank you. Okay, the conditions. Now we still have the first set, false, 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 of heaven or men, and this is exclusive or, in Jesus' words. They're both false, so it's false. Of heaven or men, and the next line would be false, true, true. Could be one or the other, but not both. So if either one is true, but the other one's not, then it's true. But if you come down, the third set is true, false, and true. It's satisfied by the first one. In this case, it's of heaven. But if it's of heaven, then it's false that it's of men. But it's the or statement is true. Now, then the fourth set of conditions can't happen because you can't have it both of heaven and of men. So the answer would be false on it. Does that make sense? Anyone got a question about this? Now, if you're reading in books, logic books, they may have these symbols in them. We'll come back and we'll keep using them over and over. I sure hope I can get my system working before next week. All right. Logically, neither the first nor the fourth set of conditions can occur. You can't have them both false. Okay, it's either one or the other. If we go back and look at it of heaven or men, it can't be of heaven, not of heaven, and not of men because there's no third option, right? And so now Jesus asked them, said, is it of heaven or men? And they said, we don't know. And so what they did is they admitted they put themselves into what's called a trilemma, which is three options. They took a third option, we don't know. We can't answer this, which means that they weren't qualified, either were dishonest or they were unqualified. They didn't know what the law of Moses taught about this matter. And they knew, and they just couldn't handle it. And they were in a problem, and that's called a trilemma. There's three options. They didn't know, and that showed something about them. I have this later in the book somewhere. If you can find the page, just do a scan for that passage that was cited here. I think it's in Matthew 21 or 22, somewhere thereabouts. It's in the context here. Logically, neither the first nor the fourth set of conditions can occur. It must be used to form a valid disjunctive syllogism. Here we have a valid disjunctive syllogism only when the categorical premises contradicts one disjunct or the disjunctive premises and the conjunct conclusion affirms the other. Either of heaven or of men. It's got to be one or the other. It can't be both. It can't be neither. It can't be both. Okay? Any question? All right. A dilemma is going to take a valid disjunctive syllogism. It's going to take one that's valid. Okay? All right. Now, this gets us into conditional syllogisms. And this is really where we really need to really slow down. They're called hypothetical or conditional syllogisms. Now, this is two different names for the same thing. Some of you drive a car, some of you drive an automobile, say. And so a car is an automobile. And so we're looking at hypothetical, I'm just going to call them hypothetical or conditional syllogisms. They're both, it's two different names for the same thing. This syllogistic form is referred to either as a conditional or a hypothetical syllogism. Their names are derived from the fact that the hypothetical conditions are the fulfillment of the arguments, if-then statements. There are two basic kinds of these. First is the pure hypothetical. All propositions are conditionals. And second is the mixed hypothetical, where one proposition is hypothetical if then, that's hypothetical, if then, if A, then B. And the other is categorical, which we've been studying. Most of the following rules apply to both types. So the following rules apply to both types of these hypothetical syllogisms. I've used both forms in this volume, and in my writings, I've used both forms and called them hypothetical. Now we have 6 basic rules for a valid hypothetical syllogism that we must understand. And the first rule is all hypothetical syllogisms must have exactly 3 terms, just like we did in categorical. 2 positive premises yield a positive conclusion, just like in categorical. 2 negative premises yield no conclusion, just like in a categorical. Got second, third, reverse, sorry about that. Fourth, for a positive and a negative premise, only a negative conclusion follows. So if you got one is positive, the other is negative, your conclusion has to be negative. Fifth, the term that occurs in both premises must be modified by the words all or none. That is, they must be distributed. And the sixth is a term that occurs in the conclusion is modified by the words all or none must be modified by all or none in the premises. Okay. Any questions? Pretty much the same rules. A little bit different, 1 or 2 rules that are different, but pretty much like we have in a categorical. Now, there's only 2 forms of these hypothetical syllogisms, and the New Testament has a bunch of hypothetical syllogisms in it. The 2 forms are, one's negative, one's positive, basically. And so we're going to give them in words and also in symbols. And we use the word modus ponens That's Latin for mood or mode that affirms. So this is a mode or that affirms something. So the word mode and mood are used interchangeably. Okay. And that's so in grammar, like Greek grammar as well. Mode and mood are used interchangeably. The words are. The statement, if S, then N. In symbols, F, S, and then the arrow means if. If S, then N. All right. So that's in symbols. Now here's an example. If John is a Christian, then he has been baptized. I believe we'd have to all agree with that. So we can say, if he's a Christian, and I know he's a Christian, then I know he's been scripturally baptized. And we say, well, John is a Christian. We affirm that. See, we affirm this. And so our conclusion is he has been baptized. Now let's go back up to the very first one now. If S, then N. The S up there, the S stands for, and I use S and N, sufficient, then necessary. That's how you want to remember it. We'll define what sufficient and necessary mean, and that'll be really helpful to us in constructing arguments and evaluating them. If sufficient, then necessary. All right, if S, then N. S is true, so we'll define what sufficient is in just a moment, in just a little bit later. Maybe not till next week. But if S, then N, then S is true. So what I'm claiming is sufficient to prove it. So we'll define what sufficient is. John is a Christian. It's sufficient to claim that if he's a Christian, that it's necessary that he be baptized. So the first part, if John is a Christian, is the S. John is a Christian is S. And so that's what S is. S is John is a Christian. And that's your antecedent, antecedent. That's your antecedent. Go back to the one at the top up there, if you would. Right there. That word John is a Christian, that word John is a Christian is your ante, that's Latin for before, antecedent. And after the word then are your consequent. So that's the consequent. The consequent, if he's a Christian, is that he has been baptized. The consequent is that it would guarantee he's been baptized. So you need to recognize that we'll be using the term antecedent and consequent. Now, John is a Christian. You're affirming the antecedent up there. S. And that's valid. If I can prove that John is a Christian, then I can prove that he has been baptized. So my conclusion, then, if I prove my antecedent to be true, my consequent is true, John has been baptized. That's the consequent. We can think of it as a consequence. The consequence of being a Christian is that he guarantees he's been baptized. All right, any questions? All right.
Yes, when the term protasis.
Protasis.
Protasis?
Yeah.
Does that come into play here?
Yes. Protasis and apodosis. That's terms that's used in the Greek sentences. And the protasis would be S. Okay, if S, then N. So S, that's your antecedent is your protasis, and that's in the Greek language, it's Greek grammar. And your protasis is he has been baptized, that's your consequent. All right? Does that help?
That helps. I'm not sure I follow. The protasis is S?
The
Is that what you said?
Yeah, protasis. Yes.
And ends. I didn't recall hearing the protasis and consequence being used together. but apparently they are. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the Greek sentences have this structure in them. There's actually a structure of if-then statements. That's what you're talking about, called conditional sentences. I think I have this in one of the appendixes. You might check that out, but I think I got an appendix that has that in it. Okay. All right. Good question.
Thank you.
All right. The second form is a negative, and it's modus tollens. That's Latin for modus is mood or mode, and tollens is to deny. So this is a denial mode. This is a negative that denies it. So right here, we say if S then N, just the same form. So that first part's the same form. So we got the same premise here. If John is a Christian and he's been baptized, all right? If that's true, then I deny the consequent. You deny the consequent. John has not been baptized, so you deny that. And when you deny that, that makes your antecedent false. It denies it. So John has not been baptized. If John's a Christian and he's been baptized, he has not been baptized. So that guarantees he's not a Christian. Does that make sense? Everybody okay with that? So that's a negative. It denies. Any questions? All right. Now, that's modus tollens. And now, in the two valid forms above, we're going pretty rapidly, but I don't want to overwhelm you with this now. The letter S represents the word sufficient. And that's why I've chosen S, not P and Q. Okay? So I've chosen S in my example. Some other books use P's and Q's. Okay? And so right here, I've chosen S. It means sufficient. The antecedent S has to be sufficient. And the N represents necessary. So we'll define those words. And that's hard, fast. Okay? The following section is going to clarify the meaning of these two words. They're very important. A conditional symbolic form is always written as if S then N, S then the arrow and N. If S then N or others write it as with the horseshoe laying on its side, if S then N. Okay? Those are the two ways that I've seen it. Those are the two ways you normally see it. Now we can chain together a series of hypothetical arguments. And we'll look at ones down here in this, and we'll probably end the class with this last one, example 2. If S then N, and then we say if N then R. All right, we chain them together. If S then R. So if S then N, if N then R, if S then R. So we can conclude that. All right. So we're saying S is sufficient and N is necessary. And if we take the necessary, if the necessary is true, then something else is necessary for it to be true. Therefore, the first one, S, implies R. Does that make sense? Now here there's an example of it. I won't look at it right now. Normally I would look at it if I was in charge of this, but I'd flip over and go into it. Let's don't worry about it right now. I'll try to get it back in and do it next week. And I'll put this in next week if I can. I've got to get this thing working. All right. Example 2, let's do it, and then we'll close. So go down there. Yes, thank you. Example 2. The first premise, if Jesus were resurrected, and I use were in the subjunctive sense, if he were resurrected from the dead, which of course he was, then Jesus was a prophet. How do I know that? Well, he prophesied of his resurrection. There are several passages showing that. Any question? That's my proof. if Jesus were a prophet, and again, this is subjunctive mood in English, if he were a prophet, which of course he was, then what he spoke was true, because prophets always spoke the truth. Prophets of God did. Of course, we're not thinking of him being a kind of prophet except prophet of God. All right. Third premise, if what Jesus spoke were true, again, subjunctive mood, then he was the Son of God. Why? Because he said over and over he's the Son of God by implication and also by statements as well. Right? Therefore, conclusion, if Jesus were resurrected from the dead, then he was the Son of God. Right? Romans 1:4 says that. Right? So we chain these arguments together, and this is an argument that I would use with atheists. Right? Any question? All right. Now, this gets us to necessary and sufficient conditions. This is on the bottom of page 66. So what I want you to do is I want you to study those for next week. And we'll also come back to example number 1, and that's being in 1 Corinthians 15. There's a series of arguments chained together there in 1 Corinthians 15. The Apostle Paul chains them together. So, but it's real critical that you get a real good grasp of what it means to be necessary and sufficient. Right? Now, what I've done is I've quoted more than one logic book. They word it differently, but they're all saying the same thing with different words. So I've tried to get 2 or 3 logic books here so you can really get these squared away, because these are really, really, really important that we understand this. So can you back up just a minute to the one just right up above it? Thank you. The first premise, the antecedent, Jesus were resurrected from the dead. That's your antecedent. That is sufficient. In other words, if that is true, then the consequent has to be true. That's what it's saying. And the consequent is necessary. It is necessary for the consequent to be true if the antecedent is true. All right? Now, we'll go back and we'll hammer that pretty good. And then we'll skip back up to 1 Corinthians 15, 12 through 19, and I'll put the text of the Bible on there. We'll look at it right out of the text of the Bible. The Bible uses all kinds of logical arguments over and over and over again. Right?
Question.
So, yes.
Is there any limit to the number of these premises you can have? So, I mean, what we're looking at here in example 2 is you've got basically if A, then B, if B, then C, if C, then D, therefore if A, then D.
Yes.
Expand that to more premises?
There's no limit.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, but I wanted to ask.
Yeah, there's no limit. These are called sorites. There's 2 kinds of sorites. We'll come back to them and look at them later. But this is a sority, S-O-R-I-T-Y, and it's in this chapter as well. I want to slow down and really get these, because these kind of syllogisms are just over and over in the New Testament. And we find them and we got to grasp them, because we can take these syllogisms and we can take them and change them into categorical as well. And we'll learn how to do that. And so we can go back and forth from the 2 types of syllogisms. Okay? Any questions? So see your necessary and sufficient. Study those and try to digest what they're saying there. Because whenever I do this, I'm going to say if, S, then N. All right. Any questions? All right. I'm going to stop recording now.